My name is Brittany, and I was 9 years old when this happened. I was a Girl Scout when this occurred, and I was selling cookies to people in nearby areas. My parents trusted me very well, and that's why they weren't with me while I was selling the cookies. Anyway, I sold a few boxes here and there, and I eventually approached a house where I saw a man on his front porch smoking a cigarette. He was an older looking man, I'd say in his mid-40s. He seemed nice, and so I asked if he wanted to buy some cookies. He said that he would love to buy some, and proceeded to reach into his pocket to pull out what I was assuming his wallet. He then stopped and said, "Oh, I think I left my money inside the house. Would you want to help me find my wallet? I think I put it down somewhere." At this point I was a bit nervous and confused, but in my 9-year-old state I thought that it would be a nice thing to do. So I stupidly walked into his house. Alarms start going off in my head when I realized that there were absolutely no lights on in the house. The only light that was visible was the sun peering in from the windows. He led me to a big black metal door in the middle of the hallway and said that he thought he left his wallet down there and asked me to go in there with him to find it. He opened the huge metal door that led down to a flight of stairs to what I was assuming a basement of some type. He opened the door for me as if he were hinting at me to go down there first. I thought of what could be awaiting for me down there. All I could see were the first few steps, but other than that, it was pitch black down the stairs. The second I stepped on the first step, I felt a hand push me down the stairs and the door closing. I fell down the stairs and ended up lying on a concrete floor. It was so dark in that basement that you wouldn't even know it was daytime. Eventually, I found a switch on the wall, and thank God it was a light switch. The basement light lit up, and I felt a bit more comfortable. I looked for a way out, but there was no way out except for the big metal door, which was of course locked. However, I noticed another door in the basement. It was a small wooden door that had spray paint on it. I figured that door was my only way out. I opened the door, expecting it to lead me to the hallway or another room of the house, but instead, I found something in there that would forever haunt me. I found at least 4 body bags with rotting corpses inside of them. I wanted to scream, but I was too scared to. I eventually found a big axe on the table and managed to break the lock on the big metal door, and thank God the man wasn't home. My parents called the police, but I don't know if they ever found the guy or not. All I could say is, be careful and don't ever go into a stranger's car or house. I hope I never see that man again, and it still haunts me of what I saw in that basement. I was around 10 when this incident took place. My family and I had been living in a 2-storied house for a few years now. When I lived in that house, it was extremely boring. There were no neighbors for miles or any kids my age, as the house we lived in was in a rural area. One day, I was home alone for a few hours because my parents had left to go visit a few friends. I was playing a game on my Xbox when I heard the basement door creak open a bit. I got startled at first, but then just figured that it wasn't shut all the way and that the wind must have pushed it, as I had left the window open. So I simply went back to playing my game. About an hour later, I decided to get up to shut the basement door. However, when I was about to shut it, I noticed that the basement light was on. I knew that I had never turned it on. I called my parents and asked them if they had left the light on in the basement. There was a short pause before they responded in a confused voice saying, "No, we never went into the basement." I suddenly realized what may have happened, but before I was about to tell my parents, my fears were confirmed when I heard footsteps from down in the basement. I slammed the door shut and told my parents that there was someone in our house and that I was calling the sheriff. It took maybe about 20 minutes for the sheriff to arrive. I told him what I had witnessed, and he quietly went down into the basement. He came back out a few minutes later and told me to come look at something. I went down in the basement with him to find that there was a hidden stairwell that led down to some sort of room. In the room were some old blankets, some milk cartons, and even alcohol, and there was also a ladder that led up with a hatch at the top that led into the woods. Whoever it was gone. He simply climbed up the ladder and out into the woods. I was completely terrified, knowing that whoever was down there had been living there and watching our every move. My parents arrived later, and it turns out that the hidden room was some sort of bomb shelter. We moved out of that house 3 weeks later. Alright, so I was about 8 years old when this happened. My family and I had lived in a 2-bedroom house, and my parents eventually got a job in Denver, Colorado, which meant I had to leave everything in my life behind. So we eventually moved to a much bigger house in Denver that we would all feel more comfortable in. It was a 2-storied house with 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and a living room and a kitchen, and even a basement. It was a very nice house overall. So after a week of unpacking, we finally moved in. I started a new school and made some new friends, and overall, I enjoyed it. Anyway, a few weeks after we had moved in, I went down into the basement to do laundry, as that's where the washer and dryer was. As I was putting my clothes into the washer, I could have sworn I heard something coming from the other side of the basement. Our basement is huge, and on one side where I do the laundry, there's a light, but on the other side there was no light, and in order to get up the stairs, you would have to go through the dark part of the basement, and that's where the noise came from. I gathered up the courage to run through the dark part of the basement and run up the stairs. I went to my room and played some games on my phone when my mom walked into my room and asked me if I had been eating chips in the basement. I told her no and that I just did laundry. She then left the room. Fast forward a few hours later, I went down into the basement again to get clothes from the dryer. For whatever reason, I looked to my left to see that the door to the boiler room had been opened. My parents had left a few hours ago, so I figured that they must have forgot to close the door. I looked a bit closer to see that there was someone peeking through the crack of the door. I wanted to scream, but I just couldn't. I decided to play dumb and made it so that it didn't look like I noticed them. I simply walked back up the stairs and locked the basement door. The first thing I did was call the police and my parents. The police arrived in 5 minutes and I led them into the basement. They came back out carrying a man from the basement. He was arrested and went into a mental institution. After that, my parents installed a camera system and we got a dog to watch the house a few days later. I really hope I never see that man again.